Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 11.2. This is the first patch for set 4.5, so the meta is still being figured out, especially since there was a B patch that nerfed a few of the top performing champions. Overall, there's a wide assortment of available carry champions that you can build a composition around, but there are fewer utility champions to toss into a composition than there were in set 4, so expect today's list to be heavy on the carries. With all that said, let's jump on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to begin, we have Shyvana coming in as the number 10 champion on today's list. This pick may seem unexpected because Shyvana doesn't really stand out that much, but with the rise of brawlers, she's slowly becoming a top tier carry and is one of the better mid-game 3-cost champions that you can build your board around. In fact, with her addition, she's finally bringing some much needed new blood to the 3-cost pool. In set 4, it was basically just Kindred for the majority of the set, with Katarina being a good choice depending on the meta. Of course, Shyvana isn't perfect and isn't going to scale as well into the late game as flexibly as some of the other 3-cost champions. Most late game compositions likely won't have Shyvana in them, and that's why she's only getting a number 10 spot. That said, if you're looking for a solid early and mid game carry with the potential to run in a brawlers focused composition for a top 4, we recommend Shyvana. Next, we have Kindred coming in at number 9. Multiple 3-costs in the top 10? Yeah, we're surprised too. But Shyvana and Kindred both share a common theme, and that's going to be strong carries for the mid game. Picking up a Kindred late in stage 2 or early stage 3, and you can use them as your main damage dealer up until stage 5. But we already knew that from set 4, as Kindred was consistently the only 3-cost champion to have an impact on the meta. While this hasn't changed in set 4.5, Kindred does also bring value in other ways. First is the change to Spirit, which made it a viable synergy in the meta. It's mostly used as a secondary trait to boost carries like Zed or Kale, but nonetheless it's important to the meta and even has a build focused around it with Diana reroll. Kindred is especially good for Spirit if you get them as a chosen because you're providing a 20% attack speed buff to your whole board for just one champ. The second reason for Kindred being an even higher priority is Executioner. Executioner is used in Kale and Xayah focused comps, and while Kindred won't be the main carry in those builds, they're still needed to provide the trait. And since you're adding in Kindred, you can easily toss in a second Spirit, which will boost those compositions. All in all, Kindred is doing quite well in the new meta of 4.5. Moving on to the champion coming in at number 8, we've got Swain. Honestly, it was a toss-up between Swain and Morgana for this position in the top 10. Both of them have a lot of use in the meta because of Siphoner, so the deciding factor was the carry potential for Swain over Morgana. But Morgana is still a great champion to consider if you're looking to run Siphoner in your composition, as well as being pivotal for enlightened focused builds. Swain doesn't really have any particular composition that he's part of, he's just one of those 5-cost champions you try to toss into your late game board. If that provides you with Siphoner, great. If not, you're still getting a hard to kill frontliner with good AoE damage. And that's what makes Swain so good, it's the survivability that allows him to last so long into the late game. The main downside to Swain is that his traits aren't always going to be that impactful. Siphoner's healing is nice, but the healing won't matter if your board gets bursted down, and Dragon Soul is relatively niche at the moment. Both of those traits are good for him, but he's strong enough on his own that he doesn't even really need them. If you're finding yourself going to level 8 and 9 without any direction as to what champion you want to put in, we recommend giving Swain a try. Next on our list, we have Zilean coming in as the number 7 champion. As per usual for our top 10, we do save a spot for a Mystic champion. But in set 4.5, Mystic isn't as necessary as it was previously, since there's quite a lot of physical damage and less emphasis on magic damage overall. Of course, it's never a bad choice to splash Mystic into your comp, as the trait will get value, it's just not as much of a necessity anymore. Zilean is still the top dog when it comes to Mystic, and honestly, just as a standalone 5-cost champion in the late game. Being able to revive multiple champions is incredibly useful, especially if you can get a 2-star Zilean. There's not much else that needs to be said in regards to Zilean, as his ultimate is just so good. One thing to keep in mind about Zilean in 4.5 is that Ornn can potentially make a really good artifact for Zilean. The artifact is Manazane, and oh boy, is it good on Zilean. It will make his second cast come out really quickly, which almost always guarantees him to get 2 casts off in a fight, which can often win the round. So keep that in mind if you end up with a board that utilizes both Zilean and Ornn. Let's move on to the next champion that comes in at number 6, Atrox. Oh yes, Atrox. Atrox has received a ton of buffs in just 2 patches on top of the changes that they made to Vanguards. Vanguards in general are doing quite well in set 4.5 because they now also gain magic resist in addition to the armor, and the new champions added provide a lot of crowd control. Basically, it's made Vanguards one of the best frontline options just in general. What Atrox brings is good crowd control, damage, and he's really hard to kill thanks to all the buffs. Sejuani still has better AoE crowd control, but Atrox as an all-around champion is now better than her and basically any other Vanguard besides the utility that Ornn provides with his artifacts. If you need a frontliner, play Atrox. The only downside to him is that cultists aren't really doing well, so you're really not going to get much use out of his second trait, but you know what? That's okay because of just how good he is on the front line. In the middle of the pack, we have Ornn coming in at number 5. Ornn has been a fun addition to the game with set 4.5 because of his blacksmith trait. For those of you unfamiliar with it, Ornn creates a special item called an artifact after a certain amount of rounds when he's on the board. These artifacts have a wide variety of stats and effects and basically add an extra layer of power to the late game. And really, it's because of those artifacts that Ornn is even on the list, because without it, he's just an okay frontline champion. Yes, he does have crowd control, but it's not reliable, and a level 1 Ornn is rarely even going to get his ultimate completely off. Elderwoods are doing well, but even in that composition, he's not as important. That all said, you will want Ornn if you can afford to put him in, at least long enough to get 1 or 2 artifacts from him. The potential power the artifacts provide is usually worth using up one of your unit slots to have Ornn in. Honestly, if Ornn gets any buffs to his main kit, he may be bumped up to the best champion in the game, but for now, he's rocking a solid 5th in our top 10. Up next, we have Zed as the number 4 champion. Zed is a tough champion to place in the current meta. He still feels quite similar to set 4 Zed with Shade, but you can at least play around him since he won't drop aggro. Slayer works really well for him, and the rework to Spirit means the return of Zed and Spirit being played together. Factoring in those strengths and weaknesses, we arrive here at the number 4 spot. Zed isn't as good as the 4-cost carries, but if you can 3-star him with good items and a composition supporting him, he's capable of at least going toe-to-toe with other champions in the late game. All in all, he's a solid carry during the early stages of the game, with a lot of potential in the late game if you can high roll his items and 3-star him. And now we get into our top 3, which is focused on different 4-cost carries in the meta. To start off, we have Olaf coming in at number 3. It's a bit of a toss-up whether Olaf should be 3rd or 2nd on the list, because sometimes he can feel unstoppable, but other times he just gets bopped down by a Kale or Aurelion soul. But for the most part, if you can build a composition around him, obtain good items for him, and hit Olaf too, you're going to be cruising towards at least a top 4. With good positioning and scouting, you can turn that top 4 into a top 2 relatively consistently. But the downside to Olaf is his inherent weakness of being melee. Sure, RFC can alleviate that issue, but ideally you'd rather have your 3rd item be either adding more defense or damage. Being a melee carry also comes with a need for player experience, as knowing the best way to position him is important. This takes time to learn, so you may find yourself struggling with Olaf or maybe even swearing off him completely, but trust us, once you begin scouting more often and figure out the right positions for Olaf, he's going to pop off for you. Given these flaws, it does seem like 3rd is a fitting placement for Olaf. Let's move on to the champion coming in at number 2, Kale. It's interesting to see the difference in regions when it comes to Kale. Europe, for example, was heavily favoring her, while North America was only playing her some of the time. But with the B patch hitting Elderwoods, it now seems that Kale is being played more often all around. We should also note that the spot was between Xayah and Kale, but Kale has more potential as a carry, and Xayah was part of a composition that just got nerfed. Still, Xayah is pivotal when playing Kale, so don't neglect Xayah just because we have Kale in the top 10 and not her. Alright, back to Kale. Overall, she's a lot like set 3 Kale. Build your composition to buffer and buy time so that she ramps up in a fight and then clears up the enemy board. She's reliable with good items, and thanks to Executioner being a small trait, you can play flexible boards around her. Good carry and flexible? That's definitely a top 2 champion for sure. And the champion coming in at number 1 this week is Aurelion Soul. Despite being nerfed in the B patch alongside the composition he has mostly been played in, Elderwoods, Aurelion Soul is still really strong. The damage nerfs haven't really slowed him down at all, as his burst potential is insane with the mage trait and items like Jeweled Gauntlet. While you're not guaranteed to win when running Aurelion Soul, you are, for the most part, likely going to get a top 4 if you 2-star him. The amount of damage he outputs makes it unlikely for you to lose rounds by a significant margin, so you're not going to bleed out health quickly in the late game, even if you have a weak board. But we do want to make note of the fact that there is at least some counterplay to A-Soul, since you will aim at the farthest champion away. It's nice having the ability to play around him as opposed to Ahri, who basically hit the entire board with her ultimate. So, props to the TFT dev team. That's going to be it for our top champions for patch 11.2. But before we go, we have a few honorable mentions to talk about. There's a lot of champions we could highlight here, but 3 we have to touch on are Katarina, Yone, and Rakan. First up is Katarina, who deserves recognition as the main carry for Warlords. Outside of Warlords, she's kind of below average. But as the main carry for Warlords, she can be devastating to play against, especially when you 3-star her. Next, we have Yone, who was recently buffed in the B patch. The buff is the main reason as to why we've added Yone to the honorable mentions, mainly to bring attention to the fact that he's a good champion again. Not that he was unplayable after the initial nerfs he received, but he certainly was a far cry off of his former glory. Now he's back to being solid and worth playing in the late game. Lastly, we have Rakan. Rakan did receive fairly large nerfs in the B patch, so this spot is mainly to acknowledge how much of an impact he had on the 11.2 meta initially. That said, he's still a strong champion, so don't overlook him too much just because he was nerfed. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. Set 4.5 brought a lot of great additions to the meta, which is reflected in our list today. It will take some time for the meta to truly settle, so expect to see the list change up in the next patch. Let us know in the comment section below which of the new champions are your favorite. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.